Hope your week is off to a great start. I'm Min Sun-hee with our foreign journalists here in Seoul. Welcome to the show.
Good to be back, thanks.
Well, an international scandal over toxic eggs was unleashed in full scale here in Korea when authorities found traces of the pesticide Fipronil in local eggs. Now, the pesticide is used to treat lice, fleas and ticks, and if consumed in large amounts over time, it can cause kidney and liver failure. In this edition of Foreign Correspondents, we take a look at rising public fears over chemicals in modern society. Global concern over chemicals is on the rise in light of revelations about pesticide-contaminated eggs in Europe. In July, Belgian health authorities announced that some eggs out in the market had been contaminated by pesticide.
It was only on the 20th of July when the Belgian authorities informed the Commission via our rapid alert system that the Commission then became aware of the contaminated eggs with Fipronil.
The problematic pesticide ingredient was Fipronil, a toxic chemical commonly used to kill cockroaches and fleas. According to the World Health Organization, Fipronil, if consumed in large amounts over time, can damage the liver and kidney. This wave of concern, which originated in Belgium and the Netherlands, first spread to Germany, which imports a majority of its eggs from both countries. Shortly afterwards, the pesticide-tainted egg distribution was confirmed in Sweden, Britain and Italy, as well as in parts of Asia, including Hong Kong and Taiwan. In response to concerns that Belgian pesticide-tainted eggs had been introduced into Korea, the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety reassured consumers that domestic eggs and chicken were no problem. However, these words of reassurance were overturned within a few days. Fipronil was detected in eggs produced in a farm in Gyeonggi-do province.
정부는 지난 8월 14일 경기도 남양주시 농가에서 피프로닐 검출을 확인한 이후 최대한 신속하게 대책을 마련하기 위해서 모든 노력을 다하고 있습니다.
Even eggs certified as organic were also found to have traces of DDT, a toxic insecticide.
잔류 기준에 미달되기 때문에 훨씬 미달되기 때문에 시중 유통을 허용을 했던 것입니다. 넘어섰다면 출하 정지되고 회수 폐기에 들어갔을 겁니다.
Adding to fears was a report that sanitary pads for women were also a risk. A civic group who investigated sanitary pads, a necessity for women, found 22 types of harmful substances in 10 different domestic brands. As a result, some consumers are considering class action lawsuits.
화장품과 마찬가지로 모든 성분을 의무적으로 표시하도록 하는 전성분 표시제를 추진하겠습니다.
In this edition of Foreign Correspondents, we delve into these chemical-related scandals. Koichi, is the media in Japan also covering the egg scare?
Not really, not so much, because after this situation started in Europe, Japanese health ministry announced that in Japan also this kind of pesticide is prohibited, and so it's safe. And not so much argument occurred in Japan after that. So
I'm going to assume health authorities did their check and found that the eggs were safe in Japan.
They didn't. They said it's prohibited, and there's no report found that somebody is using such things, and basically that's it. Yeah.
I see, because Korea conducted its tests after concerns were raised that maybe these eggs were also in Korea, and then found that our own local eggs had traces of this pesticide. Observers claim that the recent scandal here is clear proof of the potential danger on public health in light of government laxity and the lack of professional ethics, and in some cases ignorance of the farming industry with regard to the use of chemicals. What are your thoughts, Frank?
Well, I think that you know, it's very difficult for the public to trust authorities when these types of scandals take place. There is a question about who's responsible for this, whether it's the producers, the government regulators, or the public to choose intelligently the products that they consume. I would put most of the onus on industry and regulators to take care of this and to more effectively monitor and regulate food production.
Amid the scare over the eggs, the Korea Food and Drug Administration came under fire for claiming that it was okay for a person to consume 2 contaminated eggs a day for the rest of one's life without worrying about one's health. Do you believe these words are deserving of criticism, Koichi?
Actually, that Food and Drug Administration did the right thing because, first of all, you know, that's the people are supposed to be informed scientific facts. And also, when we think about the mental stress of people who already had such eggs or make their children eat such eggs, somebody should tell them it's okay, just 2 or 3 eggs, it doesn't make not that huge difference. Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Elise?
I just thought the specificity maybe came off wrong. So when they said 2.4 eggs or something like that, that was what made it awkward. But had they just come out and said, these eggs are safe in moderate amounts or in moderate quantities, something without an actual metric on it, it would have been fine. And I think it would have calmed a lot of fears. So maybe be a little less specific next time.
Yeah, I wouldn't, we're in media, but we're kind of on the offense being journalists. And the people at the Food and Drug Administration in this case are on the defense. I don't envy that public relations person's job in crafting the press release that's describing this problem. Because no matter what they say, people like us are going to be able to pick something out of that will be a relatively sensational fact that it can share with the public and then increase the sort of concern in the public. And I think it is important that the public does have concern. At the same time, the people that craft those messages that go to the public need to be extra careful in what they write. And there may be an opening at the Food and Drug Administration in the PR department, given what happened with that comment about eggs.
Right. Animal advocates have long placed priority on animal welfare. They claim that the absence of chemicals in rearing these animals will ultimately ensure healthier food.
I think there are a lot of different arguments about that. There's been some recent research about how it's important for us to sort of eat more natural foods that might be more difficult to consume, that don't have chemicals, that expose your stomach to enzymes and things that might, again, trigger a response from the body that will in turn make it stronger. And if we go back to, let's say, Joni Mitchell's song about, I think it's Woodstock, I'm not sure what lyric it is, but it's about how she'd rather have, worms in her apples than them treated with chemicals. And I think that there's a really good argument for limiting the amount of chemicals that are used in food production.
Aside from the egg scare, Korea was hit by another scandal in recent days. It was the scare over sanitary pads for women, in which a civic group claims they found carcinogens. As a consumer, Elise, what were your thoughts after reading these articles?
This is obviously going to be worrying to women who are users of those pads and consumers, of this particular sanitary product in general. The question is the science of it. This is one civic group. And they were claiming that there's VOCs, which is a chemical compound that shows up in toys, in any sort of plastics that are made from China. So our kids are playing with VOCs all the time. And so the claim that, oh, well, therefore you're going to have painful or heavy periods or cramps. I mean, what woman doesn't when they're on their period? So I don't know that just because there are these particular symptoms and they're making a claim about these chemicals that the science is sound. And I don't think that there necessarily needs to be a whole national panic just because one civic group makes these claims about symptoms that are actually fairly common symptoms for women the world over. So I'm very skeptical of it, and so are our journalists at NPR.
What are your thoughts, Koichi? Has there been a similar incident in Japan?
Maybe it's a bit different, but of course, well, we had a big accident on nuclear plant in Fukushima, and after that, people are worried about radio-contaminated foods or water. And so I think still this Japanese authorities are inspecting quite many of the rice and fruits and vegetables produced in that area.
I think that the concerns here are really well founded, and that we really don't know what we're doing with our food sort of cycle. There are so many chemicals being applied to food, and also the effects of those chemicals could be shown up much later on. For example, the issue with sanitary pads, that could show up in a woman's children, or and the same with Fukushima. That could show up later on. There was a huge industrial accident, perhaps the largest ever, in 1984 in Bhopal, where a huge chemical cylinder exploded. Between 4,000 and 15,000 people were killed. This is back in 1984. Now, something like 500,000 people, 500,000 people were affected, and tracking those effects over time is proving to be a very, very difficult task. So, really analyzing the effect of, these sort of industrial disasters and chemical contaminations amongst the population and tracking them is going to prove to be a tremendous challenge, and we're really sort of in the beginning of the introduction of these chemicals into the food chain. So over time, I think we'll see more of these types of scandals, as time passes.
In our second report, we take a look at the growing presence of chemophobia here in Korea in light of a number of shocking cases in the past. Toothpaste, wet wipes, deodorizers, disinfectants and more. In recent years, products that are frequently encountered in everyday life are becoming a source of fear for consumers. That's amid ongoing reports that these products contain hazardous chemicals. And because of this fear, chemophobia is spreading throughout Korea. Chemical plus phobia. Chemophobia is a new word to describe the fear of chemicals. In Korea, the humidifier disinfectant incident prompted much concern over chemical substances. The incident caused lung failure, killing children and mothers alike since April 2011. This reality was revealed by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which claimed chemical compounds in the humidifier disinfectant were the causes of lung diseases. The family members of victims visited the UK headquarters of the company that created the product and demanded responsible measures.
한국에서 일어나고 있는 이 모든 일에 대해서 영국 국민들에게 알리고자 왔습니다.
Even after this incident, news related to chemicals continue. Last year, some toothpaste, mouthwash and shaving cream were found to contain chemical ingredients that could cause pulmonary fibrosis. This past July, some deodorizers and wet wipes for pets were found to have chemical components that could cause skin rash.
반려동물용 탈취제를 분사할 경우 미세입자로 분사되기 때문에 유해한 물질이 함유되어 있을 경우 피부 발진이나 호흡기 질환을 유발할 수 있습니다.
Meanwhile, efforts by the government to address chemophobia continue. With regard to the tainted eggs incident, Seoul has vowed to fundamentally improve the livestock industry and establish a national food management system. Also, this past August, President Moon Jae-in apologized in person to the victims and family members of the humidifier disinfectant case and pledged to make every effort to prevent a recurrence.
재발방지 대책에 만전을 기하고 또 우리 국민이 더 이상 안전 때문에 억울하게 눈물을 흘리는 일이 없도록 하겠다는 약속을 반드시 지켜나가겠습니다.
Chemicals affect our daily lives. We sit down now to discuss how to make productive use of these chemicals. Now, as I mentioned in the report, there's been a slew of incidents involving hazardous chemicals in daily products, ranging from toothpaste to disinfectants for humidifiers and, more recently, sanitary pads. Has your country, Elise, experienced similar scares?
Well, throughout history, of course. I mean, the one that I can think of right off the top of my mind from the Western world was the pregnant women in Britain in the 1940s and 50s that were taking drugs for, just typical nausea that was actually leading to major birth defects, and it was happening over 2 or 3 years they were taking these drugs. And so there was a whole slew, like a mini generation of babies that were born without limbs and in some cases unable to survive because they were missing so many body parts because of a drug. Now this led to a lot of regulation, and this is true for the US as well. There's always this complaint about too many regulations and too much red tape, but regulations exist for a reason, and they exist, and oversight exists for a reason, and it's to keep communities safe. And so because there have been so many deadly and terrible incidents in the past, governments have corrected themselves. And so my hope is that in more emerging economies around the world, that there is more safeguarding and more regulation as a result of a lot of these tragedies that happen.
In doing a little bit of research about this, I took a look at what's going on in Canada, and I got to the Health Canada website, and they had basically a bulletin of every single product advisory and recall, and they were relatively minor. Like if a company didn't put proper labeling on a product, it was, an advisory was sent out, or a recall was made. For instance, a pannier that goes on a bicycle, a bag that goes on a bicycle was recalled because it didn't have proper bolts that might fall off and get caught in the wheel or something like that. There were, a tremendous number of those taking place. The regulations and the oversight was quite robust and reassuring to me as a consumer. And I hope that in South Korea we see the same type of thing. And I think in the case of the egg scare, certainly we're seeing, I think quite robust follow-up from the government.
The phrase "no chemi clan" here in Korea is used to describe those who refuse to use anything that includes synthetic chemicals. I mean, they make their own cosmetics, they wash their hair in vinegar and so forth. Do you have a similar movement?
Of course, there's all these sustainable communities and hippies out there. The farm-to-table movement is very prominent in the US, and the idea is farm-to-table. You know where your food comes from. You know the name of the chicken that was killed, that was used in your soup. I think that's wonderful. My mother has dreams of this. She wants to, grow her own sustainable garden and source all her food. Not only because it's good for the environment, but also because it tastes better. And so I applaud this movement. I wish that it were possible. One of the problems is that the world has so many people on it now. And so being able to reliably feed all of these people without big farming, if you will, or mass agriculture is, I would assume, impossible. So unless we go through a major cultural shift to farm-to-table movements and sustainable farms and go back in time, really, I don't know that it's going to be possible anymore.
Right. Some pundits believe concerns over chemicals in Korea have reached a point of paranoia. Do you agree, Koichi?
There are always such people in any country.
It's true.
So we have some in Japan too. So.
Right, so you will have mothers with young children being extra cautious about products.
Yes, but so it needed to be thought that mental health, mental stress, and also body's health. It's, if you care about too much about food and chemicals, then you can't have a normal daily life.
Because you're constantly worried. What about your Korean friends?
My wife is extra careful in a number of sort of safety areas with my daughter around the house, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that there are some people in society that are a little bit more careful. Perhaps they push the authorities a little bit further and are more likely to make a phone call if their child or they get some type of reaction to something that they've consumed. And I think it helps to keep, producers and the government on their toes.
Strike a balance, perhaps. Others now claim that the media is to blame for the chemophobia here in Korea. What are your thoughts, Elise?
I did think the media did not properly scrutinize this pad scare. You know, because we took a look at it and our science desk looked at it to decide whether it was worth a story. The entire team looked at it a little bit closely and said that the verdict is out. That is, there's not enough science on this before spreading it to possibly an international audience. And so there needs to be better science reporting, I think, generally. You know, when studies come out, there's all sorts of research studies that come out, and you see these cycles in the media where it's like, caffeine is good for you, caffeine is bad for you, wine is good for you, wine is bad for you. The truth is, without like a much closer look at actually what the studies show, trying to boil that down to a simple headline of good or bad, or buy this pad or don't buy this pad, is way oversimplifying the issue.
Right, and Frank, speaking about regulations, what efforts can be made by the government here to ease concerns or anxiety over chemicals, in your opinion? This is a question I'm going to address to all of you then.
Definitely stay on top of it, and I think they've done that, even though, you know, there were some problems perhaps with the press release talking about it being safe to eat 2.6 tainted eggs per day. I think that word tainted being in there, it could have been worded a bit differently, but I think that they are doing a relatively good job of it now, and perhaps that hasn't been the case in the past if we, you know, get into the humidifier case.
What about you, Elise?
Transparency and accountability. So I think the public really needs to see the transparency that goes into research, the data, how that data was, what those data sources were, and how they came to these conclusions, so that the public can feel safe about these things. I'm taken back to the MERS scare and how the government was very withholding of information of where patients were and like which hospitals, and you know, the contagion period and the temperature that you needed to be contagious, and all of these things, and the holding back of information was actually what led to the scare. So transparency first, but then also accountability. So if there are bad players or people acting in bad faith, FDA directors, Food and Drug, that is, so Food and Drug Administration directors that did not act responsibly, those people need to be removed to show that there is accountability for these sorts of problems.
And I think the internet gives us another level that we can, that governments can share information with the public. I mean, when I looked on that Health Canada website, the depth at which I could investigate each recall was extraordinary, to the point where, okay, this is getting boring, because I'm reading about how this bolt from this pannier can possibly get into a bicycle and nobody was seriously injured. And, you know, and the internet enables us to do that, to share and link to more information that would be reassuring to the public.
Definitely. Koichi?
It's same, but transparency is the most important thing, and when they say this is safe, then they have to show the evidence and scientific data, and civil society and also journalism has to understand them and check them.
What could consumers do to protect themselves from chemicals? Practice of simple wisdom or something more, maybe more studying on chemicals?
I do think it's incumbent upon governments to take some responsibility in making sure that products that do go out to consumers are at some base level safe and not going to kill them or injure them. That's sort of the social contract that we make as a part of a society living under certain governments. And so consumers should obviously be informed, but I don't think that we should walk around as consumers being frightened all the time. We should have some reasonable understanding that the things that we're going to buy and consume won't kill us.
And I think we need to look at stuff like the tax base, the funding of those regulatory bodies that are going into that. It's not free. You know, an extra sort of level of reassurance and safety can't be free. You've got to pay for it in taxes and a regulatory framework, and, you know, at the checkout counter as well. And South Koreans should be prepared to pay a bit more for that reassurance.
Koichi, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think when we get sick, sometimes we go to hospital and doctor says something. When we can't believe that, we take second opinion. So it's like that. We need to have second opinion other than a government official. Maybe it is some doctor or some civil organization, or could be a science journalism.
I see. Well, before we go, a final question to our Lees, because it's been a while since we last saw you. What are your thoughts on today's discussion on the fear over chemicals here in Korea and also around the world?
Well, this has obviously been a very timely topic this summer in Korea, but it's not new. You know, we've seen cycles and cycles of scares and then responses to it. So my hope is that the recent scares in Korea prompt a strong response and a way to do better for next time to prevent something like this from happening again.
Now, as proven in the case of DDT, which was promoted as a wonder chemical against pest problems following the Second World War and then demoted as a toxic substance, especially against human health, chemicals can bring both blessing and blight. Accordingly, a more efficient health apparatus is necessary against chemicals. Thank you for watching.